The merchant vessel Pacific Dawn had been sailing the same trade routes for 3 years without incident. Captain Marcus Sullivan thought he had everything figured out: advanced radar systems, reinforced hull plating, and a crew of experienced sailors. What he didn't expect was for his $1 million security investment to be overshadowed by 2 former military contractors who looked like they belonged in a coffee shop rather than on the deck of a cargo ship. But when the Crimson Tide pirates emerged from the morning fog with their modified speedboats and assault rifles, everything Captain Sullivan thought he knew about maritime security was about to change forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The controversy started 3 months earlier in the bustling port of San Francisco. Captain Marcus Sullivan stood in the headquarters of Maritime Security Solutions, staring at a proposal that made his jaw drop. The company's CEO, Rebecca Hartwell, had just presented him with what she called their Human Asset Protection Program, essentially hiring 2 former military specialists to serve as onboard security for high-value cargo runs through pirate-infested waters. "You want me to pay $75,000 to hire 2 bodyguards?" Sullivan asked, flipping through the thick dossier. "Rebecca, I've got state-of-the-art detection equipment, automated defense systems, and a crew that's been running these routes since before these pirates were born." Rebecca leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. "Marcus, you're moving $15 million worth of electronics and rare earth minerals through the Strait of Malacca. The Crimson Tide pirates have hit 4 vessels in that corridor this month alone. Your insurance premiums have doubled, and Lloyd's of London is asking serious questions about your security protocols." Sullivan laughed, a sound that carried more frustration than humor. "So your solution is to hire 2 guys with guns? What is this, the Wild West?" "I've got radar that can spot a fishing boat from 20 miles away, night vision cameras covering every angle of approach, and communication systems that can reach the Coast Guard in under 30 seconds. The dossier contained photographs and service records for the 2 specialists Rebecca wanted to place on his ship. The first was Jake Morrison, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned into private maritime security after leaving active duty. His photo showed a man in his early 30s with short brown hair and steady eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His resume listed operations in the Persian Gulf, counter-piracy missions off the Horn of Africa, and specialized training in close-quarters combat. The second specialist was Elena Rodriguez, whose background was even more impressive. Former Marine Force reconnaissance, she had spent 8 years in special operations before moving into the private sector. Her service record included deployments in Southeast Asia, advanced training in tactical response, and certifications in maritime security protocols. In her photograph, she appeared calm and professional, with dark hair pulled back and an expression that suggested she didn't waste time on unnecessary conversation. "Look at their credentials," Rebecca said, sliding another folder across the desk. "Morrison has neutralized 3 separate pirate boarding attempts in the last 18 months. Rodriguez has a perfect record, not a single successful hijacking on any vessel she's protected." Sullivan picked up Morrison's file and read through the details. The man had grown up in Portland, Oregon, and joined the Navy straight out of high school. His military service had taken him from basic training in San Diego to advanced SEAL training in Coronado, then to combat deployments that were heavily redacted in the official records. After leaving the service, he had worked for several private security firms before specializing in maritime protection. "These are impressive resumes," Sullivan admitted, "but I'm not running a military operation here. I'm moving cargo from point A to point B. My ship has defensive capabilities that would make a destroyer jealous. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, automated alert systems, emergency beacon transmitters, and enough technological firepower to detect a threat before it gets within miles of my vessel. Rebecca stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor, where dozens of cargo ships were loading and unloading their valuable contents. Technology is wonderful, Marcus, but it has limitations. Your sensors can tell you when someone's approaching. Your cameras can show you what they look like, and your communication systems can call for help. But what happens in the 45 minutes between when pirates board your ship and when help arrives? Sullivan opened Rodriguez's file and began reading through her background. Born in Phoenix, Arizona, she had been raised in a military family. Her father was an Air Force mechanic, and her mother had served in the Army Reserve. Rodriguez had excelled in high school athletics before enlisting in the Marines, where she had quickly distinguished herself in combat training and leadership programs. Her transition to force reconnaissance had come after she demonstrated exceptional skills in marksmanship, tactical planning, and high-stress decision-making. According to your own security assessments, Rebecca continued, it takes an average of 37 minutes for naval forces to respond to a distress call in the waters you'll be crossing. The Crimson Tide pirates have perfected their boarding techniques to the point where they can secure a vessel and begin transferring cargo in under 20 minutes. The mathematics were troubling, but Sullivan still believed in his technological solutions. His ship, the Pacific Dawn, was a marvel of modern maritime engineering. Built in the shipyards of Seattle just 5 years earlier, it incorporated the latest advances in cargo security and defensive systems. The bridge was equipped with multiple radar arrays that could track objects as small as a life raft from distances exceeding 15 miles. Thermal imaging cameras provided complete coverage of the ship's perimeter, automatically alerting the crew to any unusual heat signatures or movement patterns. I understand the concern, Sullivan said, closing the files and placing them back on Rebecca's desk. But I've invested heavily in prevention rather than reaction. My ship doesn't get boarded because my ship doesn't get surprised. We see threats coming long before they become problems, and we take evasive action or call for assistance while maintaining safe distances. Rebecca returned to her chair and pulled out a tablet, which she turned toward Sullivan. The screen displayed a map of the Pacific Ocean with various colored dots indicating recent maritime incidents. Red dots marked successful pirate attacks, yellow dots showed attempted attacks that were thwarted, and green dots represented vessels that had passed through dangerous waters without incident. Your prevention strategy works well in ideal conditions, she said, pointing to several green dots along Sullivan's usual routes. But look at what happened to the Northern Star last month. She tapped a red dot near the Strait of Malacca. Captain Jennifer Walsh had the same confidence in her technological systems. Radar, cameras, communication equipment, the works. The Crimson Tide pirates used a new approach. They disguised themselves as a distressed fishing vessel, broadcasting emergency signals that masked their true intentions. Sullivan studied the incident report that Rebecca pulled up on her tablet. The Northern Star had been carrying a cargo load worth $12 million when it encountered what appeared to be a sinking fishing boat. Following maritime law and basic human decency, Captain Walsh had altered course to offer assistance. The distress signals had seemed legitimate, and the vessel's radar signature matched that of a typical commercial fishing boat. The pirates had modified a genuine fishing vessel, Rebecca explained, installing hidden compartments for weapons and high-speed engines that could propel them at nearly 40 knots once they revealed their true nature. By the time the Northern Star realized they were dealing with pirates rather than fishermen in distress, the boarding parties were already scaling the hull. The tactical details were sobering. The pirates had used grappling hooks and rope ladders to board the cargo ship, while maintaining the pretense of needing rescue. Once on deck, they had quickly overwhelmed the crew with superior numbers and firepower. The entire operation had taken less than 15 minutes from first contact to complete control of the vessel. Captain Walsh followed proper protocols, Sullivan said, reading through the timeline of events. She reported the distress call to the Coast Guard, maintained communication with the approaching vessel, and had her crew prepared for a rescue operation. How was she supposed to know it was a trap? Rebecca scrolled down to show photographs of the aftermath. The cargo hold had been partially emptied, with the most valuable items, rare earth minerals and advanced electronics, loaded onto fast boats that could outrun most pursuit vessels. The crew had been locked in a storage compartment while the pirates worked, emerging hours later to find their ship disabled and their cargo stolen. This is exactly why human assets like Morrison and Rodriguez are essential, Rebecca said. Technology can gather information and sound alarms, but it takes human judgment and experience to interpret complex situations and respond appropriately. Morrison would have recognized the tactical indicators that suggested the fishing vessel wasn't what it appeared to be. Rodriguez would have positioned the crew defensively while maintaining readiness to assist genuine distress calls. Sullivan found himself thinking about his own crew, most of whom had been sailing with him for several years. They were competent sailors and experienced cargo handlers, but none of them had military training or combat experience. His first officer, David Chun, had been in the Merchant Marine for 15 years and could navigate through any weather conditions, but he had never faced armed pirates. His chief engineer, Sarah Williams, could repair any mechanical system on the ship, but she had no training in defensive tactics or threat assessment. "I'm not questioning the qualifications of your specialists," Sullivan said carefully. "But I'm concerned about integrating military personnel into a civilian operation. My crew works well together because we understand each other's capabilities and limitations. Adding two armed strangers to that dynamic could create more problems than it solves," Rebecca nodded, acknowledging his concern. "That's a valid point, and it's why we require a comprehensive integration period before any high-risk voyages. Morrison and Rodriguez don't just show up with weapons and attitude. They spend time learning your ship's systems, understanding your crew's procedures, and developing response protocols that work within your existing operational framework." She pulled out another folder containing integration reports from previous assignments. The documents showed detailed plans for how the security specialists would coordinate with ship personnel during various scenarios. Rather than taking command or operating independently, Morrison and Rodriguez were trained to work as force multipliers, enhancing the effectiveness of existing crew members while providing specialized capabilities when needed. "The goal isn't to militarize your operation," Rebecca explained. "It's to add layers of capability that complement your technological investments. Your radar and cameras provide early warning and situational awareness. Morrison and Rodriguez provide the human element that can interpret those warnings and take appropriate action when technology reaches its limitations." Sullivan spent another hour reviewing case studies and testimonials from other ship captains who had used maritime security solution services. The feedback was consistently positive, with several captains reporting that the presence of trained security specialists had deterred potential attacks without ever requiring the use of force. The specialists had helped crews develop better situational awareness, improved emergency response procedures, and provided peace of mind during transits through dangerous waters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but the cost remained a significant concern. $75,000 for a single voyage represented a substantial expense, especially when added to already high insurance premiums and security equipment costs. Sullivan's profit margins were tight, and every additional expense had to be justified to his company's board of directors. "I need to think about this," Sullivan finally said, gathering the folders and standing to leave. "It's a big decision, and I need to discuss it with my crew and my bosses." Rebecca stood and extended her hand, I understand completely. Take all the time you need. But keep in mind that the Crimson Tide pirates are becoming more sophisticated and more aggressive. The window for preventing, rather than responding to attacks, is getting smaller every month. As Sullivan left the Maritime Security Solutions office and walked back toward the harbor, he found himself weighing the competing factors. His faith in technology was strong, built on years of successful voyages and continuous improvements in security systems. But the incident reports Rebecca had shown him suggested that even the best technology had vulnerabilities that determined criminals could exploit. The question that occupied his thoughts during the drive back to his ship was whether 2 human guards could really make the difference between a successful voyage and a devastating pirate attack. In 3 weeks, the Pacific Dawn would be loaded with its most valuable cargo yet, beginning a journey that would take it through some of the most dangerous waters in the world. 2 weeks after his meeting with Rebecca Hartwell, Captain Sullivan found himself standing in the boardroom of Pacific Maritime Holdings, facing a panel of executives who controlled the fate of his cargo runs. The mahogany table was surrounded by suits and spreadsheets, with the company's CEO, Thomas Bradley, presiding over the discussion like a judge hearing evidence. $75,000 for 2 bodyguards? Bradley's voice carried the skepticism that Sullivan had expected. Marcus, we've already invested $3 million in security upgrades for the Pacific Dawn. The ship is practically a floating fortress. Sullivan had prepared for this resistance, but he found himself in the unusual position of defending an idea he wasn't entirely sold on himself. The incident reports Rebecca had shown him had been troubling, but his confidence in the ship's technological superiority remained strong. Still, something about the evolving tactics of the Crimson Tide pirates nagged at him. The security specialists wouldn't replace our existing systems, Sullivan explained, opening the folder of materials Rebecca had provided. They would work alongside our current capabilities, providing human judgment that complements our technological advantages. Victoria Armstrong, the company's head of operations, leaned forward with her tablet displaying insurance statistics. Our premiums have increased 47% this year alone. Lloyd's of London is threatening to drop our coverage entirely if we experience another incident like the one that hit the Stellar Compass in January. The mention of the Stellar Compass brought uncomfortable silence to the room. That vessel, operated by a competitor, had been carrying a similar cargo load when pirates had successfully boarded and stolen nearly $8 million worth of electronics. The attack had sent shockwaves through the industry and prompted insurance companies to reassess their risk calculations for Pacific shipping routes. Bradley pulled out his own tablet and began scrolling through financial projections. Even with the additional security cost, we're still looking at substantial savings if it prevents a single successful attack. The question is whether these 2 individuals can actually deliver on their promises. Sullivan distributed copies of Morrison and Rodriguez's service records, watching as the executives reviewed the impressive credentials. Morrison's background included classified operations that couldn't be detailed in the official documents. But his success rate in maritime security was documented and verified. Rodriguez's record was equally impressive, with commendations from multiple commanding officers and specialized training that few people in the world possessed. Their track record speaks for itself, Sullivan said, though he kept his own reservations. Private, 43 successful transits without a single boarding attempt reaching the deck level. Every ship they've protected has completed its voyage with cargo intact. Thomas Bradley closed Morrison's file and looked directly at Sullivan. What's your professional opinion, Captain? You know these waters better than anyone else in this room. Do you believe these specialists would make a meaningful difference? Sullivan hesitated, aware that his answer would influence not just this decision, but potentially the entire future of the company's security protocols. His instincts told him that technology should be sufficient. The Pacific Dawn had systems that could detect, track, and communicate threats more effectively than any human observer. But the sophistication of recent pirate attacks suggested that criminals were adapting faster than defensive technology could evolve. "I believe in our ship's capabilities," Sullivan said carefully. "But I also recognize that we're facing adversaries who are becoming increasingly creative in their approaches. The specialists would provide options that our current systems cannot." Victoria Armstrong pulled up a detailed analysis of recent pirate attacks, highlighting patterns that had emerged. Over the past 6 months, the Crimson Tide organization has demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility. They've used false distress signals, disguised attack vessels, coordinated multi-boat approaches, and even employed electronic jamming equipment to disrupt communications. The electronic warfare aspect was particularly concerning to Sullivan. His ship's defensive systems relied heavily on radar, satellite communication, and automated alert networks. If pirates had developed the capability to interfere with those systems, the technological advantage he counted on could disappear in critical moments. Bradley stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor, where cargo ships were being loaded with millions of dollars worth of goods destined for international markets. The insurance companies aren't just raising premiums, they're starting to require specific security measures for high-value shipments. If we don't adapt our protocols voluntarily, we may find ourselves forced to implement even more expensive solutions. The regulatory pressure was mounting from multiple directions. International maritime organizations were developing new standards for cargo security. Coastal nations were implementing stricter requirements for vessels transiting their waters. And shipping companies were facing liability issues that could bankrupt them if attacks succeeded. Sullivan opened Rodriguez's file and read through her post-military career summary. After leaving the Marines, she had worked for 3 different security firms before joining Maritime Security Solutions. Her assignments had taken her to every major shipping corridor in the world, from the Suez Canal to the Panama Canal, to the treacherous waters around the Horn of Africa. Rodriguez has experience specifically with the Crimson Tide pirates, Sullivan noted, finding a classified briefing report in her file. She was part of a joint task force that disrupted one of their operations near the Philippines last year. Her intelligence about their methods could be invaluable. The task force operation had been a collaboration between private security firms and naval forces from 3 different countries. Rodriguez had served as a tactical advisor, helping plan boarding procedures and coordinating communication between military and civilian vessels. The operation had successfully captured 12 pirates and seized 2 modified attack boats, providing valuable intelligence about the organization's structure and methods. Victoria Armstrong highlighted another concerning trend in her analysis. The average value of cargo being targeted has increased substantially. Pirates are becoming more selective, focusing on high-value shipments rather than opportunistic attacks. Our next cargo load fits their preferred profile perfectly. The upcoming voyage would carry $15 million worth of rare earth minerals, advanced electronics, and precision manufacturing equipment. The cargo manifest read like a shopping list for anyone interested in cutting-edge technology, and the route through the Strait of Malacca would take the ship directly through waters where the Crimson Tide pirates operated most effectively. Bradley returned to his seat and began making notes on his tablet. What would the integration process look like? How do we ensure these specialists can work effectively with our existing crew? Sullivan had studied the integration protocols that Rebecca had provided, and they were more comprehensive than he had initially expected. Rather than simply placing armed guards on the ship, Maritime Security Solutions required a 2-week preparation period where Morrison and Rodriguez would learn the vessel's systems, meet with crew members, and develop customized response procedures. They would spend time on the ship before departure, Sullivan explained, learning our communication protocols, understanding our cargo handling procedures, and identifying potential vulnerabilities that our current systems might not address. The goal is seamless integration rather than adding a separate security layer. The preparation process included detailed briefings on the ship's defensive capabilities, crew training sessions on threat recognition and emergency procedures, and the development of communication protocols that would allow the specialists to coordinate with both the ship's crew and external authorities. Morrison and Rodriguez would also conduct security assessments of the cargo areas, identifying potential weak points that pirates might exploit. Thomas Bradley looked around the table at his fellow executives, gauging their reactions to the proposal. The financial calculations were complex, balancing the immediate cost of hiring security specialists against the potential losses from a successful pirate attack. Insurance considerations, regulatory compliance, and the company's reputation all factored into the decision. "There's another consideration," Victoria Armstrong said, pulling up a news article on her tablet. 3 shipping companies have announced that they're implementing human security teams for high-value cargo runs. If this becomes an industry standard, we may find ourselves at a competitive disadvantage by maintaining a purely technological approach. The competitive landscape was shifting rapidly as shipping companies grappled with evolving security threats. Some firms were investing heavily in automated defensive systems, while others were embracing human-based security solutions. A few companies were experimenting with hybrid approaches that combined multiple layers of protection. Sullivan found himself thinking about his conversation with Rebecca Hartwell and her emphasis on the limitations of technology in complex tactical situations. The Pacific Dawn's sensors could detect approaching vessels and identify potential threats, but they couldn't interpret the subtle behavioral cues that might distinguish between genuine distress calls and sophisticated deceptions. "I recommend we approve the security specialists for this voyage," Sullivan said, surprising himself with his decisiveness. "We can evaluate their effectiveness and determine whether to make human security a permanent part of our operations." Bradley nodded slowly, making final notes on his tablet. "Approved. Marcus, you'll coordinate with Maritime Security Solutions to get Morrison and Rodriguez integrated with your crew. I want detailed reports on their performance and recommendations for future security protocols." As the meeting concluded and executives filed out of the boardroom, Sullivan remained behind to review the files one more time. In less than a week, Jake Morrison and Alina Rodriguez would board the Pacific Dawn and begin their integration with his crew. The success or failure of this experiment would influence not just this single voyage, but potentially the entire future of maritime security for Pacific Maritime Holdings. Walking back to his ship that afternoon, Sullivan wondered whether he was making the right decision. His faith in technology remained strong, but the evolving sophistication of pirate attacks had introduced variables that purely technological solutions might not address. In 7 days, he would discover whether human guards could truly complement his ship's advanced defensive systems, or whether they would prove to be an expensive distraction from proven security protocols. 5 days into the voyage, Jake Morrison was cleaning his sidearm in the ship's security office when the radar alarm pierced the morning silence. Alina Rodriguez looked up from her tactical charts as Captain Sullivan's voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands. We have multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. Distance 12 miles and closing." Sullivan's crew rushed to their stations with practiced efficiency, but Morrison could see the tension in their movements. David Chun, the first officer, activated the ship's defensive protocols while Sarah Williams began securing the engine room. These sailors knew their technology, but they had never faced the Crimson Tide pirates in actual combat. "Captain," Rodriguez called over the radio, "request permission to move to forward observation post." "Granted. What are you seeing that we're not?" Morrison joined Rodriguez at the bow, both specialists studying the approaching vessels through high-powered binoculars. 3 speedboats were racing toward the Pacific Dawn in a coordinated formation, but something about their approach pattern troubled the former Marine. "They're not attacking," Rodriguez said quietly. "This is reconnaissance. They're testing our response protocols." The lead boat suddenly veered away at 8 miles distance, followed by the other 2 vessels. Sullivan's. Radar showed them retreating toward a larger ship that had remained hidden behind a cluster of small islands. The entire encounter had lasted less than 15 minutes. "False alarm," Chun announced over the intercom. "Contacts are withdrawing." But Morrison was already moving toward the bridge, his instincts screaming warnings that the ship's technology couldn't detect. "Captain, we need to talk, now." Sullivan found the specialists in his ready room, both wearing expressions that made his confidence in the ship's defenses waver. Rodriguez had spread nautical charts across the table, marking positions and movement vectors with red ink. "They're mapping our defensive responses," she explained. "Speed, turning radius, communication procedures, crew positioning. Everything they need for a real attack." Morrison pulled up the radar logs on his tablet, highlighting the precisely timed movements of the pirate vessels. This wasn't random. They knew exactly how close they could get before triggering our automated alarms. "Someone's been studying your ship's capabilities." The implications hit Sullivan like a physical blow. All of his technological advantages, the radar systems, the automated alerts, the communication protocols had just been cataloged and analyzed by the very criminals he was trying to avoid. "How long before they attack?" Sullivan asked. "Tonight," Rodriguez said without hesitation. "They'll wait for darkness and approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Your radar will track them, but you won't be able to respond to all the threats at once." The next 8 hours passed in tense preparation. Morrison and Rodriguez worked with the crew to establish defensive positions, while Sullivan maintained normal operations to avoid revealing that they had recognized the reconnaissance. The ship's technology continued functioning perfectly, detecting every fishing boat and merchant vessel within 20 miles. But the specialists were preparing for threats that sensors couldn't stop. At 11:47 p.m., the attack began, Rodriguez spotted the first boarding ladder hooking over the starboard rail, while the bridge crew was still trying to identify radar contacts in the darkness. Morrison was already in position, using hand signals to coordinate crew movements while maintaining radio silence that prevented the pirates from intercepting their communications. The Crimson Tide pirates had studied Sullivan's ship thoroughly, but they hadn't accounted for human defenders who could adapt in real time. Rodriguez disabled the first boarding party with precision that left them unconscious but alive, while Morrison coordinated the crew's response from positions the pirates hadn't anticipated. "Captain," Morrison called over the radio, "suggest immediate course change to bearing 270. We need to break their attack formation." Sullivan executed the maneuver without question, his technological systems providing navigation data while the specialists directed tactical responses. The ship's radar tracked the pirate vessels perfectly, but Morrison and Rodriguez were the ones who knew how to use that information to stay ahead of the attackers. The battle lasted 37 minutes. When it ended, the Crimson Tide pirates were retreating toward open water, leaving behind equipment and wounded comrades who would provide valuable intelligence to maritime authorities. The Pacific Dawn's cargo remained secure, and not a single crew member had been seriously injured. Standing on the bridge as dawn broke over calm seas, Sullivan watched Morrison and Rodriguez securing the captured pirate equipment. His ship's technology had performed flawlessly, detecting every threat and providing perfect situational awareness. But without the human judgment and tactical expertise of the specialists, that information would have been useless against determined attackers. "So," Sullivan said to Rodriguez as she completed her incident report, "I guess the company got their money's worth." Rodriguez smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression Sullivan had seen from her during the entire voyage. "Technology tells you what's happening, Captain. Humans decide what to do about it." 3 weeks later, Pacific Maritime Holdings announced that all high-value cargo runs would include human security specialists as standard protocol. The Pacific Dawn's successful defense against the Crimson Tide pirates had demonstrated that the most sophisticated technology in the world still needed human wisdom to reach its full potential. Captain Sullivan never again questioned the value of having guards who could think, adapt, and respond to threats that no computer could fully understand. The age of purely technological security was over, replaced by hybrid systems where human intelligence amplified mechanical precision. The pirates had learned to exploit predictable defensive systems, but they couldn't anticipate the unpredictable creativity of human defenders who understood both technology and tactics. In the end, the best security wasn't about choosing between humans and machines. It was about combining both into something more powerful than either could achieve alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.